Good evening, everybody. My name is Ryan Mears. I'm your Marion County Prosecutor, and thank you for everybody for coming to the second night at CJA. We did our first night last Wednesday where we talked about the issue of dealing causing death, and today's topic is our Conviction Integrity Review Unit. I see a lot of people wearing some great shirts. Please continue to wear our CJA shirts out here. And then you guys are 2/3 of the way towards another new t-shirt. And I gotta tell you, they look great this year, so I'm looking forward to handing those out, and we'll hand those out next Wednesday on our final day, our final topic. And for those of you who participate, not only do you get a shirt, we're gonna do pictures and a couple of other things as well as kind of take a deep dive once again into the criminal justice system. So thank you to everyone who is here in person. Thank you to our friends who are watching online as we begin the conversation about the first Conviction Integrity Review Unit in the entire state of Indiana. And so we've done a lot of good work through this unit. We wanted to kind of give a little bit of insight into what our process looks like, why we thought there was a need for such a unit, and kind of the steps that we've taken to try to move forward in a positive way to have the biggest impact that we can on the community. And so I just wanted to start out. I'm going to get to the two women who do an outstanding job of running the Conviction Integrity Review Unit, but I wanted to give everybody a little bit of background. I have been a deputy prosecutor since 2006. My very first job out of law school was in the Marion County Prosecutor's Office. I have done literally every single job in the office, from prosecuting low-level B misdemeanor cases all the way prosecuting homicide cases. And one of the things as a prosecutor that you live in fear of is we better have the right person. Because the last thing any prosecutor should want to do is send the wrong person to the Department of Correction for something that they didn't do. And so having that background and being a deputy prosecutor, that was always one of our concerns. Being kind of on the front lines of these cases, making sure that we have the right person. And as you progress with your career and you work on more complicated cases, you have a lot of independent information to help verify what you are doing. One of the biggest tools that we have right now that we use is your cell phone records. Everybody's basically walking around with a GPS device that tells us where you've been, where you're going. It tells us who you've been communicating with, and to all you young people out there, you also feel the need to tell everybody about it on social media. And so we're in a really good place to figure out who's doing what, when, and where based on your cell phone and cell phone evidence. And one of the great things about that cell phone technology is not only does it help us solve cases, it also helps us helps assure us that we're getting the right person, that we are convicting the right person being involved in these crimes. And that's something that is very important to us as a prosecutor. But I can tell you, when I prosecuted my first homicide case in 2009, we didn't have any cell phone technology. The cell phones at that point in time, no one really had smartphones. You didn't do your banking, you didn't watch TV, you didn't have all these different social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, all these things. They weren't even around, they hadn't even been invented yet. And yet that's the very information that today we use to help convict people of murder, and also maybe help us realize, hey, we're pretty confident we got the right person. And I think back to that first murder conviction I had in 2009, and it was very much based on eyewitness testimony, meaning a person came in and said, I saw the following things happen, this is why you should trust my identification, this is why it's reliable, and a jury convicted that particular individual. But we didn't have those procedural safeguards of cell phone records, social media records, cell tower location, GPS data, all the things that we have now. And one of the things that you have to acknowledge if you've been involved in the criminal justice system is the criminal justice system doesn't always get it right. We are not batting 1,000. There have been mistakes made. Sometimes those mistakes have been motivated by prejudice. Sometimes those mistakes have been the result of maybe not having the appropriate technology available to us, or people just honestly thought they saw something and maybe they identified the wrong person. And so one of the things that I'm a big believer in is that I'm going to acknowledge that there are issues, that I have to be willing to do something about it. And it's not only about looking forward. I think we have an obligation to look backwards to make sure we're getting it right. And so that was kind of the genesis for me in starting the first State's Conviction Integrity Review Unit, is because I want to make sure we're getting it right. And I want you, the people who live in Marion County, to have trust that a conviction that comes out of Marion County is based on the law and the facts and applying the law to those facts and nothing else. And one of the cases that always sticks out to me was a case that happened in the 1980s. It was a homicide case. And one of the state's witnesses, I'm not making this up, this is a matter of public record, it is in multiple judicial opinions, testified under hypnosis.
What?
Yes. They thought at that point in time, if you testified under hypnosis, you were incapable of lying, and the courts allowed that evidence to be admitted. That would never happen today. One of the things that has most probably dramatically changed in terms of how we handle criminal prosecution from what we did 20 years ago when I started to where we are now is the advancements in DNA technology. The DNA technology that we are allowed and permitted to do today is light years ahead of what we were even doing 10 years ago in terms of not only the reliability, but what we're able to determine and decipher from very small DNA samples. And so my point of sharing those two stories is this. Technology changes, but also we've kind of evolved in terms of what we think is admissible and what's not admissible. And so when we're talking about things that happened during the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and even the 90s, it's important to recognize that people were oftentimes doing the best they could, but they didn't have necessarily, they weren't necessarily playing with the full deck of cards. They had very significant technology limitations. They thought something like hypnosis was okay to admit to a trial court for a jury to consider, the types of things that we would never do now. And so with that, we thought that it was really important that we take a look backwards and say, okay, were these convictions based on the real deal? Do we have the right person involved? And have we convicted the correct person? Because the only person who benefits from a wrongful conviction is the person who actually did it. And the last thing I want is someone who's innocent to be sitting in jail. And so I thought it was really important that we make significant investments in people and get really smart people to serve as the heads and co-chairs of our Conviction Integrity Review Unit. So when we started to formulate this, one of the first things that I said to myself is, I want to make sure that we have people who have defense attorney experience evaluating these cases. And let me tell you why I think that's important. You have to be able to pick apart a case and say, this is what we think is wrong. These are the questions that we need to ask. As a prosecutor, you're oftentimes looking at the elements. How do I prove each element of the crime? And murder is very easy. Did this person knowingly or intentionally kill another person? You're very focused on those elements. Defense attorneys oftentimes are trying to poke holes in those stories and they're looking for flaws. The other thing that defense attorneys are always focused on is making sure that the procedural process was handled fairly and appropriately. Another area where we have seen significant changes in the law is what's the obligation of the prosecutor's office and what's the obligation of the police department in terms of their obligation to defense. What do they have to turn over has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. And so with that, I thought it was really important that we hire defense attorneys who could come in and they could pick apart a case and they would be able to say, hey, this is why we think this conviction might be unjust, or these are things we need to take a better look at. The other thing that defense attorneys do that prosecutors do not is if I want to interview a witness, I have a law enforcement person do it. Someone from IMPD, someone from the sheriff's office, someone from Lawrence. They are the ones who do those interviews. For defense attorneys, it's oftentimes themselves. They don't have the benefit of an investigative agency supporting them. They are the ones who are personally digging into people's background, asking those questions. So I thought it was really important that we get defense attorneys who would be willing to look into these issues and investigate these claims. And so you're going to meet the two women who are now in charge of our Conviction Integrity Review Unit. And I can tell you they are both former public defenders who do an outstanding job. We are very fortunate to have both of them in the prosecutor's office. I actually worked with both of them. One of the individuals was my court line. So when you're assigned to particular criminal courts, I was assigned to Criminal Court 2 under Judge Altice, who's now on the Indiana Court of Appeals. I was the prosecutor in there. Jessica Cicchini was the public defender in there. And one of the things I thought to myself is, who can we get to come in here? And I thought to myself, who's the most annoying person I have ever worked with? And it was Jessica Cicchini. And I say that with love and with reverence in the fact that she always held me to my burden. She always made sure that I, as the prosecutor, were doing everything that I needed to do. And although I found that incredibly annoying at the time, I think that it's really important that we carry on that attitude as we evaluate these cases. The other thing that I appreciate both about Jessica and Kelly is they're willing to call a spade a spade. And sometimes their clients did commit crimes. And they were willing to recognize and acknowledge, hey, the state has a good case here, can we talk about a resolution? And so I trusted both of their judgment, and I think both of them do an outstanding job. And so with that, I will give you a little formal background. Kelly Bowder, who is also a public defender, she spent most of her legal career at the Public Defender Agency, representing clients charged with various charges. She handled hundreds of cases from misdemeanor to major felony cases, including murder. Prior to starting with the prosecutor's office, Kelly investigated and litigated cases for the Indiana Department of Education involving teacher misconduct. She obtained a bachelor's degree in social work from Ball State University and a doctor of jurisprudence from Indiana University Robert McKinney School of Law. Please welcome Kelly Bowder. Joining her at the table is my good friend, and in a prior life, someone who maybe annoyed me a little bit, is Jessica Cicchini. And she spent her entire career defending indigent clients charged criminally in Marion County. Prior to joining the Conviction Integrity Review Unit, she was a major felony division chief at the Marion County Public Defender Agency, where she primarily defended people charged with homicides. Throughout her career as a defender, she strived to put criminal defendants in a better position than they were when she first encountered them. She looks forward to doing just that in her new role, seeking justice for the wrongfully convicted. Jessica graduated summa cum laude with a BA from Eastern Michigan University and magna cum laude from the University of Minnesota Law School. Give it up for Jessica Cicchini. And before we start, first of all joking aside, these are two incredibly accomplished women who had outstanding legal careers, who had incredible professional resumes, who are doing really well in their jobs. And so I guess my first question to kind of start this discussion for the two of you is, I want to know what made you decide to leave your prior job and what appealed to you about starting the first Conviction Integrity Review Unit in the entire state of Indiana, and then take it away from there. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
Good evening. So I'm Kelly Bowder, and I saw in the Indianapolis Star when Prosecutor Mears first announced that he was going to start the units. That's where I learned about it, and I didn't know very much about conviction integrity units. I think Jess will tell you as well. We started reading about conviction integrity units, but when I saw the article, then I looked online and read the job announcement, and shall I say probably the same thing. It was written for me. It couldn't have been any more me. I was happy in my job. I loved working at the Department of Education. I had worked under a Democrat, 2 Republicans. I'd been kept in the administration, and the new administration, they'd asked me to stay. So I wasn't looking to leave, but I saw it and said, that's me. I'd always thought it would be kind of neat working for an Innocence Network organization. We don't have a lot of those here in Indiana, and I had at the time 2 young children. Now they're all bigger than me. And moving somewhere else just wasn't an option. And so I saw the ad, and I called a family friend, Terry Curry, and said, what should I do? And he was like, I'm going to call Ryan right now. And you've got to apply. You have to. You're right. It is made for you. And Terry was like, I've always tried to get you to come work the prosecutor's office. I'm going to make sure Ryan makes that happen. And so I applied, and it's everything I like to do. I like to go on the streets, do investigations, find out what happened. I don't care. I'll go to a crack house if that's where I got to go. And I've never been afraid to do those things, and it's one of my favorite things to get out and talk to the community. I think a lot of times people are reluctant to talk to the police, and I understand all the reasons why that happens. And so I'm kind of hoping that, like, when we go out and do things, were a little bit of a friendlier face, maybe, hopefully. And so what sealed the deal for me for taking the position was Ryan's final question when he interviewed me. And his final question was, why should I hire you? Which, that's a really hard question. And I said, we were in the same court. He and I didn't do battle very often, but we saw each other do battle. And I was like, you know what a pain I am. Wouldn't you rather have me on your side? And he said, touche. And so one of my favorite things working for Ryan is that he hires strong, opinionated people, a lot of strong, opinionated women. And I think that says something about the kind of leader he wants to be. He doesn't want people to just agree with him. He wants people to challenge him. And so in the interview, I knew that was it. And I know that Terry Curry was always in the background being a voice for me, which was very special. And so it just was perfect. And although I was happy, this is home, and I'm glad to be there.
Hello, I'm Jess Cicchini. I was a public defender for 12 years, and I never thought I would leave, ever. And I bet Ryan never thought I was going to leave ever until he made this position. It sounds cheesy, but in doing criminal defense, I truly, truly believed that my job was to put my client in a better place than they were when I found them. So that could have been a dismissal, that could have been a not guilty, it could have been getting them into drug treatment. And towards the end of my career there, it most of the time meant getting them a sentence that got them out while they were still alive. So that's a moving target, as you can imagine. But I found what I was doing to be incredibly rewarding. But it also felt like I was like a cog in the system, doing it one case at a time. And so when this job posting came out, I thought, the innocence movement is really moving right now. Conviction integrity units, which I did not know what it was, are growing in metropolitan and rural areas. And I thought, maybe I can take my experience, my knowledge, my passion, and help this movement to truly, advance equalities and ensure everyone gets the right due process, and to really get people to understand that we're all humans and humans make mistakes. And the system isn't perfect. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go through this PowerPoint. But this quote right here was said by that guy. The goal of a prosecutor's office is to seek justice. Sometimes that means first looking back in order to move our community forward. I truly believe that. There are a couple ways to look at a conviction integrity unit, a lot of ways. One is that we're undoing all the work that a prosecutor's done in the past. The other is we are building bridges to the community to get back to or beyond any level of community trust that we've had in the past. It's absolutely true that the only person who benefits from a wrongful conviction is the person who did it themselves. And we're going to talk about some statistics. At this point, there's over 3,300 people in the United States who have been determined to have been wrongfully convicted. Collectively, that is over 26,000 years in prison. Many of those, and I can't remember the statistic off the top of my head, but it's not an insignificant number, were cases where the perpetrator got away with it and then went on to commit more violent acts while the innocent person was in prison. So the reality is mistakes happen, and that's why why Ryan lets us do what we do. So we are the first conviction integrity unit in the state. There are probably approaching 120 around the country. The oldest one that I know of, I believe, is in Dallas, and that started in 2014. Most of the rest of them are much more recent than that. But we are the only one in Indiana. And a couple weeks, well, maybe last week, October 2nd was the International Wrongful Conviction Day. That is just I put that up there as a note so people know that this is not just a problem here. It's an international problem, and it's a problem that people are growing to accept and are making movements to ensure that the right people are in prison. Because, like Prosecutor Mears said, a lot of my clients were very guilty. But what I did is I made sure that they got every due process, that the procedure was followed, and they got the best defense that they could get. Not everyone was that lucky. So what is the Conviction Integrity Unit? How many people here have heard of the Innocence Project? Okay, so what the Innocence Project does is their entire mission is to find innocent people that are in prison or who have been wrongfully convicted. So what Ryan did is he brought this unit into the prosecutor's office. So we're kind of like an internal innocence project. We are looking only at cases out of Marion County, and our mission is to work to identify, remedy, and prevent wrongful convictions. Sounds really great. That's the line that we had when Kelly and I started this job, and we were like, cool, what do we do now? How do I do that? Luckily, this community is incredibly supportive, and while my colleagues used to be, all around my physical space at my office, now our colleagues truly are across the country. And so how did we start this? We went and asked everyone all the questions that we could think of, and even the ones that we didn't think of at the time. We talked to people from California, people running these units, all the way to Brooklyn, to Philadelphia, to Dallas, and we worked with a group called the Quattrone Center. It's at the University of Pennsylvania. It's run by a woman who started the University of Pennsylvania Innocence Project. She left that and came to the University of Pennsylvania, and their entire role is to get units like this off the ground. So that was a huge support. We gathered all the documents we could, we read everything we could, and we really tried to figure out, how do we do this? And how do we justify what we're doing? How do we pick the right cases? And it's not easy, but we're gonna walk you through a little bit of what our day-to-day looks like. Before we start, I know this is probably a little hard to read. This is October from 2022, October of this year. Since last October, there's been 130 people exonerated, one of whom was exonerated by us, who Kelly will talk about. What these graphs show is, and we'll focus just here on all crimes. It's crimes by race and ethnicity. As you can see, this big, tall, red line on both sides, that represents the number of Black people who are convicted, wrongfully convicted. That is extremely disproportionate to the population of Black and brown people in our population. Black and African American individuals account for approximately 13% of the population in the United States, and they are way outrepresented in not only the criminal justice system, but also the area of wrongful convictions. So how do you figure out, how do you find a wrongful conviction? We have people writing us all the time saying, I'm innocent. I'm innocent. But we can't be what they call the 13th juror. We can't look at the verdict and say, well, I would have done something different. We don't have that power, nor should we. So what we spent a lot of time on in the first several months was learning, how do you end up with a wrongful conviction? What are some of the common causes? This chart details the biggest perpetrators The first, mistaken witness identification. There is a big difference between believing you're right and being accurate. I tell people, I used to start my jury selection when I had a mistaken identity case, and I tell the story about how I was at some like beachside little shop with my husband and his mom. And I walked up and I wrapped my arms around my husband and gave him a big hug. And then I turned around and there was my mother-in-law and my husband staring at me as I'm hugging this other man, who was very surprised to be hugged. I mean, people make mistakes. It's particularly prevalent. It happens often when it's cross-racial identification. Countless studies have shown that people of different races have a harder time identifying people who are not from their same race. So mistaken witness identification, the biggest here, which is really quite disappointing, is perjury or false accusation. In 64% of wrongful convictions, someone lied or said that something happened that didn't happen. False confessions are an actual thing. It's really hard, I think, for myself and just the human psyche in general to think that someone would say that they committed a murder when they didn't. But the psychology is out there. It has happened. And so they account for about 13% of the wrongful convictions. False or misleading forensic evidence. This is a big advancement in DNA, has really helped us forensically. But even 15, 20 years ago, we were dealing with a lot of junk science, particularly arson science, where they were determining that a house fire was intentionally set when it, was an accidental electric fire. So there's been a lot of advancements in the forensic world, but 24% of the wrongful convictions had some sort of problem with the science that was presented. And then this last one, official misconduct. This is someone in the system, a prosecutor, a police officer, a detective, did something wrong, and that led to the conviction. In my experience, it doesn't have to be malicious. Like I said, people make mistakes, the laws are different. Kelly will tell you about how the law changed regarding what police officers have to give over now versus what they didn't, and that affected multiple convictions. Again, this is just this kind of the same thing I showed you earlier. 53% of the people with wrongful convictions are Black, 12% are Hispanic, so that they are way more represented in these graphs and in our prisons than in society. So, independence, transparency, and flexibility. There's a bunch of words up here, but essentially what it means is we have to be a respected conviction integrity unit that actually does the work. We have to be able to do the work without Prosecutor Mears breathing down our neck. And we have to, we report directly to Prosecutor Mears so that there's no break in the chain of us to him. And importantly, we are physically located apart from the rest of the office. And we're still in the same building, but we're located in a separate area. And we've learned that that is a best practice because it just gives the perception that this is, Prosecutor Mears is trusting us to do this work, and he has opened this unit showing that it's a priority that we convict the right people here in Marion County. I'm sure you watch the news. Sometimes we shouldn't, but it's really awful. There are plenty of crimes out there that we should be getting the right people. And so we're just there checking to make sure everything happened correctly along the way. So our days are not glamorous at all. Some days are fun. They're all fun. going out into the field, investigating, like that's really cool. We have an investigation where we've spoken to almost 100 people. And so that's really cool, like we're actually like the detectives, right? That's what we think of ourselves anyways. But day to day, it's a lot of reading. So we get, I think our oldest application that we got was 1978 maybe. We couldn't even find the police report to see what happened. So a lot of what we do is pulling records, the prosecutor's file, the trial transcript, any pleadings that were filed, sometimes IMPD's file, and we just dig through them to see, is there anything to this person's claim? Sometimes we do get to the level of reinvestigating. I will say it's a small portion. I would say about 2% of the applications we get are the cases that are being fully reinvestigated. We put our detective hat on and we go out, we find witnesses. We've had evidence tested for DNA. In our first case that we had DNA testing done, we confirmed it was the right person. And that's a victory. None of us want someone to be innocent and in prison. So when Kelly and I were figuring out what our unit looked like, Prosecutor Mears really put a lot of trust into us. And he was like, you go, you figure out what you think the unit should look like, and then come back and check with me and make sure that's what I want it to look like. But so the big question is, what cases do we look at? So we can only look at cases in Marion County. We have a lot of people who apply from other counties, but we don't have jurisdiction there. We only look at felonies, and we have a priority of people who are currently still in prison. The other part is there has to be either a claim of actual innocence or other wrongful conviction. And so what does that mean? That means that there is something in that application, in that file, that Kelly can dig into, can investigate and then prove. So for example, someone says the witness against me got a deal, the jury didn't know that they had X case dismissed, and they had a big incentive to testify. So we go to the prosecutor's file and we look to see if there are notes about that deal. They say, the police officer did something wrong, the prosecutor did something wrong. We go out and see if we can prove that. Because at the end of the day, I can't do anything with someone just saying I'm innocent but not being able to prove it. And maybe there are people out there who don't have the ability to prove it, and that would be a tragedy. But so essentially we're like, give me something that I can investigate and prove, and then the next step, is that enough to give you the remedy you're seeking? Most people, that's getting out of prison. But a lot of people, even people who've gotten out of prison, we know several potential exonerees who they're out and they're like, being out's not enough. I want my name to be cleared. So our process is we have an application, we have several copies of the application there. And what that does is it gets some biographical information, gets some information about what's happened since their trial. Did they appeal? What motions have they filed? But most importantly, it prompts individuals to think about those causes of wrongful conviction. So was there any forensic testing in your case? Was a witness given a deal? Has a witness come forward and changed their story? Did someone say that you confessed when you didn't, or it was a false confession? Is your case really old and maybe new DNA technology can do something? Can either answer yes you did, no you didn't. So that's where it all starts with this application. We read through the application, and it's like this very preliminary screening. Is there something that pops up saying one of those causes of a wrongful conviction? If there's something there, then we move on to what we call our internal review, which is we pull the prosecutor's file, we get all the documents that we can on the case. And so you could be talking for a single case, thousands of pages. And then, in, like I said, a very small percentage, we go through that full reinvestigation, and then we ultimately make a recommendation to Prosecutor Mears, and he's the one who has the final call as to whether we file something with the court. Who we are, our team is Kelly, I, and our paralegal, Danette. We do have access to victims advocates at the office and investigators. We also have an advisory panel that helps us. It helps us kind of process some of the cases if we're having if we're stuck on something. When we had our first exoneration, we took that to them first, had them review it. It's a community leader, a clergyman, a former judge, and a private lawyer who are on our advisory board. This is what I just said. The cases with credible and verifiable claims of innocence or wrongful conviction. Basically, can I get someone else to believe me that I think that this person did it wrong or was wronged? Is there something that I can take to court with a straight face and say, here is the proof? We don't look at cases that involve affirmative defenses. So that's self-defense, consent in a sexual assault case. Currently, we don't look at those. Not saying it. We may change. It says we should be flexible, so sometimes we change some things. And these are the true reasons that I think when it comes down to it, that Prosecutor Mears wanted me to do it, wanted us to do it, and why Kelly and I are happy in these positions. And the biggest one is the prosecutor's ethical obligation. The Indiana rules of ethical conduct for prosecutors has a special section, 3.8, that specifically is directed towards prosecutors, and it affirmatively says their job is to get justice, not convictions. So there is a special duty that a prosecutor has that is even higher than any other attorney. We really hope that if we could right some wrongs, that it would help build community trust. I know that that's a multifaceted, giant issue, but we hope that what we do can provide justice for the community and the victim, and then hopefully that will move along towards improved training and public safety. Because the reality is if witnesses don't come forward, if witnesses won't cooperate, then the prosecutor can't do their job, and the prosecutor cases will go either unprosecuted or potentially dangerous people could get away to do the right thing. So when we first started, a lot of people were like, who are these people? And why are they coming in here trying to undo all of our good work? And oh great, now they're gonna be looking at my files, they're gonna be snooping around the office, like they just want, to be havoc. Truly, we are hoping that our colleagues in the office and around the nation can see that we're not out here to say that the prosecutors are bad people or that the police are bad people. It's just the statistics show wrongful convictions have happened, and what's the harm in looking back to make sure the right people are in prison. So these are some of the things that we thought people would come up with, saying what our actual motivation was, that we were just going to open the prison doors and let everyone out. We haven't done that. So we think that the justice system as a whole is evolving, as Prosecutor Muir said, in a way to not only try to advance, but also to make sure we're advancing from the right spot. That we are on a level ground, that the convictions that are had are the convictions that should have been had, and those ones that are unjust, then perhaps we can find them, identify them, and give some justice to the defendant and the victim. This is just a list of some other conviction integrity units around the country. This is our application. It's 14 pages long, which is a lot of pages too many probably. But we really tried to encapsulate everything that we could. We wanted to catch everything. So some of these units won't look at someone if they pled guilty. Some of these units will only look at certain levels of felonies. And we really felt strongly that we wanted a wide scope. We wanted a big funnel so that we could hopefully catch everything as much as we can. So our application's really long. It's available online where people can download it. They can also fill it out and send it in, because that's a question I haven't answered. How do we even find these people? It's mostly people in prison. It's mostly the defendant themselves. But we do have family members. We've had court staff say, hey, take a look at this case. And so anyone can fill out the application. Anyone can submit it. The only thing we require is that the convicted person sign a consent saying they want us to look at it. Some people don't want their families to know where the DNA was, and so maybe that's a reason they wouldn't want us to review the conviction. So this is how it's playing. Shoot. Broke it. Okay, so this is how it's playing out for us. By and large, most of our applicants have been black males. We are probably tracking higher on those numbers than the national average, but I want you to remember these are just the people applying. So they are self-selecting, but I think it's safe to say that all of the cases that we're looking at, full reinvestigations, are black or brown people. This is our website. It has some information. It has the application. That's our email address. So I just put that there so it could be accessible to you all. Some things we've noticed, most of the cases we look at are homicides. And most of them come from the late 90s, early 2000s. We have some older cases from the 70s and 80s. I think we're seeing a cutoff in the early 90s just because of time. People who were convicted in the 60s and 70s may no longer be among us. We focus on people who have long sentences and are currently incarcerated. We do look at a case if someone's out of custody, but as you can imagine, we feel it's a priority to look at the people who are currently incarcerated first, and particularly ones with really long sentences. This is all the players in the system. We work really closely with the defense attorneys in our investigations. So a conviction integrity unit, we've been taught, should be collaborative, and it should be not adversarial. It's to try to come in and to approach it in a different way. Because the idea of the criminal justice system is you have the defense attorney, you have the prosecutor, and these two titans are coming into the courtroom. They're going to clash and the truth will come out. The reality is what happens in a courtroom is what the prosecutor can prove, and does that result in the truth? So we're trying a little bit more of a collaborative way. So in our investigations, we've worked with the defense attorneys. We go see witnesses together. We, research stuff together. We decide what avenues to pursue. And we found so far that it has been, it has worked really well. So we're about 2 years in, we're 2.5 years in, and we are happy to say that we have our first exoneration. And Kelly's going to talk to you about that.
And before I get to the excitement of talking about Mr. Benson's case, I think it's important to know that as you looked at the data that Jess presented, this is exciting and this is our first, but we have looked at hundreds of cases before we've gotten to this point, or during this point, hundreds of cases where we got it right. Jess talked about the DNA case that we did, but there's a lot of cases where we have looked at it and got it right. We have felt that it's very important in that process for us to reach out to people and let them know. So we reach out to the prosecutors who prosecuted the case if they're still around or want to talk to us, and let them know. I personally called someone who was really worried about it when I started looking at the case, and I was like, good job. You really did a really good job. And he was like, oh my goodness, I thought you were going to tell me I did something wrong. And I was like, no, that's not what we're here to do. People make mistakes. It happens. As defense attorneys, we learned a long time ago that people will look at our cases forever that Jess and I worked on in different appeals processes. And if I got it wrong, I would want someone to fix it. If I didn't do something I was supposed to do as a defense attorney, I'd want to fix it. And I think most people are like that. And a lot of the prosecutors that we've talked to have been relieved when we've reached out to them and say, you got it right. So that's really important. And although we've been doing this for 2.5 years, we've been doing a lot of work to find out we did get it right, and we did get the right person, and let people know. But there's always a first, and Leon Benson was our first, and I didn't want to go when he was actually released, but I met him later for the first time in person. I had met him and interviewed him during our process, but this is when he and I first met, and I was a weepy, sobby mess. So I'm glad they took that side of me. I'm perfectly fine. The other side was a mess, so I'm glad. Mr. Benson was charged with murder, and the murder occurred in 1998, and he spent 25 years in prison, and we believe wrongfully. So the state of Indiana versus Leon Benson was the case. The murder happened on August 8th of 1998, and the victim was Casey Shane, a young man from Plainfield. Couldn't be more innocent of a person who did not deserve for any of this to happen. And as you can imagine, it's hard on everyone. It was at 14th and Pennsylvania. I didn't put a picture from 1998 because the pictures were horrible. They were very bad quality. This is a picture that I took. Part of the reinvestigation process really is going out. I think Jess and I were particularly really good defense attorneys because this is the kind of work that we do. We would go out there. I won a lot of cases as a defense attorney I didn't deserve to win because I think I over-prepared, and I would spend a long time at crime scenes trying to figure out how things worked, get you credibility with the jury as well, when you know where everything is. And so I sat in my car at 14th and Pennsylvania quite a bit to try to figure it out. It looks a lot different now than it did back in 1998. I don't know if many of you know, but right where the cars are, that's where the Damien Center used to be, just to give some perspective. It was 5 shots in the dark, and there was essentially one eyewitness who testified that she was standing here, and probably about 3 cars up was where the shooting occurred in the dark. She was a white woman, and eventually, but when the police did it, their investigation heard the name of two drug dealers that worked in that area. One was Leon Benson, he'll admit to you that's what his profession was back in the day. And another gentleman, they were the biggest dealers on that block. And that's kind of who the police looked at when they were trying to figure out what had happened. So it's a cross-racial identification. As you remember when Jess talked, that's one of the biggest causes of wrongful convictions. Leon Benson, when he was arrested on August 14th, so pretty quickly after the murder occurred, there's no weapon ever recovered, no DNA. So this was essentially, there was a second eyewitness that testified. He was kind of a hot mess back in 1998. He's since passed. And he partially said that it was Mr. Benson, but then completely recanted. So I'm going to just focus on the one eyewitness because unfortunately he was a bit of a mess. Information before and after Mr. Benson's arrest pointed to an alternate suspect. Like I said, there were predominantly two drug dealers in the neighborhood. But you know, having someone come in and identify, and she was steadfast. She is steadfast today, as we stand here, that she believes that it was Leon Benson who she saw. I think Jess explained it perfectly. You can believe something. I don't think she's a liar at all. I think she believed to this day that it was Leon Benson. I just believe she was wrong. And again, this is 150 feet of a distance that she was from the shooters at night, and the two suspects were medium skinned black men. So and it just is hard to imagine anyone could identify anyone, even someone that they know. The first trial ended up in a mistrial, and then the second resulted in Mr. Benson's conviction, and he was sentenced to 60 years in the DOC. He cried out at the end of the verdict, "I'm innocent," and has steadfastly said his little mantra is "the truth never dies." He said that all during when he was charged and broke down after the conviction. So what went wrong? The rules of evidence and discovery were different, as Prosecutor Mears and Jess talked about. We have evolved over time, and back when his case in the late 90s, detectives often didn't turn over their notes. Some of them did, but it wasn't a rule that they absolutely had to. Today, they have to. They have to turn over everything. Everything that is in the IMPD file has to be turned over to the prosecutor. Prosecutor has to turn it over to the defense. That wasn't the rule back then, and the detective did not turn over his notes. He did not have to turn over informant tips, and he had multiple tips. Unfortunately, those tips pointed to the alternate suspect. There was video evidence. This was 1998, but in the picture there was a church out there. There were cameras out there. He watched them. He didn't find anything that he thought was helpful, and he didn't collect them. Even though the shooter was seen on one of them. And there continually came in tips about this alternate suspect. I don't think this detective is a bad person at all. I've interviewed him multiple times. He's a good man, and I think that he's working multiple cases, and he's got a woman who comes in and says, "It was Leon Benson. I saw him. It's 100% him." That's compelling when you hear that, and I think any one of us would think, if someone, that neighborhood is predominantly was back then predominantly a minority area. She was a white woman. For her to come forward, I think was a pretty brave thing in itself. Another thing that has changed over time is that when the eyewitness came to identify Mr. Benson, or when she came in to be interviewed by the police, Mr. Benson was in the police office at the same time. That's a big no-no. I don't know, and we can't ever find evidence whether or not they saw each other, but it would be a big deal. I trust police officers. I think they're good people. And if you saw someone sitting next to a police officer and the police officer thinks it's him, I think you would feel like, okay, the police officer's got this guy in here. He might know something more than I don't know. And I think that probably gave her some, I did get this right. So that doesn't, and I hope it doesn't happen. I don't think that it does happen anymore. We have all learned about identifying people and how to do it in a way that is proper and not biased. And so it was just a kind of a culmination of things that led to Mr. Benson's constitutional rights being violated. He had a right to the information, according to the rules now, to all the information about the alternate suspects so that he could, or his attorney could, investigate that. So we did our reinvestigation. It consumed 2 years of my life. And as Jess will say, in the cases that she does, we have to divide and conquer, because that's the only thing that we can do is take cases. We also thought it was very important on these cases that she never touch a case that she worked on, and I never touch a case that I worked on, so that we can say that we're having a fresh set of eyes look at things. And so we divide and conquer, and we really started from the beginning. We started taking applications in our office April 1st of 2021. Leon Benson sent his application April 9th of 2021. And he filled in, we've got 14 pages. He filled in 14 pages and the sides and the margins and everything you could think of, which kind of caught our eye that we get a lot of applications now and people don't fill it in. I'm like, this is your one shot. It's like, your appeals are done, fill it out. He filled out everything. And as I first started working on his case, I had his file on my desk, and I got an email from the University of San Francisco. And I thought, well, that's weird. I don't really know anybody out there. And it was 2 attorneys from the University of San Francisco, and said, we're going to represent Leon Benson. It's just a fascinating story. A woman from Pennsylvania had heard about Leon's case. He had Facebook pages and social media pages professing his innocence. Someone from Pennsylvania heard about it, and she has a friend at the University of San Francisco and said, you got to take this case. I believe it wholeheartedly. You've got to take this case. And so they emailed me and said, we want to take the case. And I was like, well, come to Indiana. Like, let's go. I'm ready. And so we, like Jess said, we treat it like we are the detectives starting from the very beginning. We interview any witness we can find and talk to anybody who will talk to us. Some people don't want to talk to us, but we still try to make them. I think there's a couple witnesses who were reluctant to let us in. There was one in particular who didn't want the prosecutor in the room, and now Ms. Shirley invites me over anytime I want. And I think it takes time. People got to trust, and I think that's something Jess and I are really working on. Multiple witnesses came to us with information that they never shared with the police because they were afraid, and the alternate suspect did a really good job of intimidating everyone in the neighborhood and threatening to kill anyone who talked to the police. And they were scared to tell the police that, obviously, because they had been threatened. But when we come knocking on the door, 23, 24 years later, they were willing to share with us. And quite several of them quite embarrassed that they had never come forward, and that drug dealer gave them free drugs if they wouldn't talk, or threatened to kill them if they talked. And so it took quite a bit of time reading. As Jess said, we read every last word that has ever been written about the case. I got on all of his Facebook pages and social media pages, and we worked collaboratively with the defense attorneys and determined, as we did that we all truly believed that they got the wrong person. So as Jess said, once we get to that point where Jess and I are convinced, then we take it to Prosecutor Mears. It took several meetings with Prosecutor Mears to work through the case. I mean, it took me 2 years to work on it, and then had to convince Jess that that's what we should do. And then we took it to Prosecutor Mears and said, this is what we want to do. It's hard learning about a case. I knew everything, from 2 years of working on it, getting him up to speed. And so then we have to get to the point of, what do we want to do and how do we do it? And so we worked together with Prosecutor Mears and other members of the prosecutor's office, because you want to brainstorm and come up with ideas. This is a new kind of area of law, and so we met and we talked about it. So if people think this was just Prosecutor Mears just woke up one day and said, hey, let's let Leon Benson out of prison. This is a long, thoughtful process that takes time and takes convincing and just working it through. Is this the right thing to do? And after all of our meetings with him, he said, yes, this is what we want to do, figure out how to do it. And so we filed multiple documents with the courts. We filed it here in court papers here in Marion County. Every word that the defense team submitted and that we submitted, we talked about it. And that's unheard of, that the defense and the prosecutors agreed to language. We agreed to put initials instead of naming people as a way of protecting the people who were willing to come forward. Prosecutor Mears felt very strongly about protecting these people who were brave enough to come forward, and so we wanted to continue to protect them and not share their identities as much as we could. And so we filed a document. We first filed a document. It's long and boring, and nobody wants to hear the procedures of how you do it, but it's a multi-step process. We filed our first documents in December of 2022, and then on March 9th of 2023, Judge Flowers issued an order, and these are parts of the order that she did. I just took a snippet of it, but essentially that she thought that the evidence that was withheld from him on today's standards, that it's essentially a Brady violation. That's case law. That's, again, boring. But essentially, you have to turn over everything. Those are our rules now, that you have to turn over everything. And although those may not have been the rules back then, she agreed with all of us that should have been turned over, and that the alternate suspect was more likely the person who killed Casey Shane. And withholding all of those violated Mr. Benson's right to a fair trial. We had told the judge, and we had met with her, because this is, again, a new area of law. It's Judge Shatrice Flowers, who was wonderful and thoughtful, and again, was someone who wanted to think about it. Didn't just want to make a ruling. She took a long time to think about and issue her ruling, but we had told her that if she vacated his conviction, which was the only way anything could happen, is if she agreed and vacated his conviction. It doesn't matter if the prosecutor's office wants to do something, the judge has to sign off on it. And we had told her that if that's what she agreed with us, that we would dismiss the case. And so I was sick that day, I didn't feel good, I really wanted to go home. It came down to the end of the day on March 9th, but I turned my car around and I came back and filed a motion to dismiss. And to Judge Flowers' credit, I was like, I'm going to make sure I get everything. I'll stay here. I'll make sure everything gets to the Department of Correction. She said, no, I already did that. I want to make sure he gets out. And so I personally called and asked him. So Leon didn't know on March 10th what was going to happen, and got called down to the office and told to pack his stuff and that he was going home. And so I truly, in my heart, believe this was the right thing. Will we ever know with 100% certainty that he didn't commit this crime? No. But every bit of evidence that we were able to uncover points to the alternate suspect. And we truly believe he was denied the things that were protected to him under the Constitution to get a fair trial. And given all the time that has gone by, he couldn't ever get a fair trial if we ever decided to go that route. We got to go to the Innocent Network Conference, And so it's obviously Jess and I and our wonderful paralegal Danette and Charlie Kiefer Nelson, who was one of his attorneys. So it was great, getting to hang out with him. He is doing great. And one of the best things I think of the story with Leon, and one of the hardest parts of, I think, Jess and our job is when we have to notify the victims' families. As you can imagine, Casey Shane's family thought the right person was in jail for 25 years. They slept better at night thinking, it was probably one of the worst days of my career, knocking on her door to tell her that we were even opening the case. I went to his sister's house and told her the good thing I think that has come out of this. One of the things Jess and I learned was that we needed to help people like Leon and help, not just stop, not just let them go, but help be a continued part of this process. And so we reached out to a group called Healing Justice to help us learn how to help the victims' families. And Healing Justice has had a meeting with Leon Benson and Casey Shane's sister. And we recently attended a workshop together and did a presentation. And one of the best days out of all of this was watching Casey's sister Colleen hug Leon. They call it restorative justice, and restoring people's beliefs in the system, and then Colleen coming to grips with the fact that the man that she had villainized for all these years, rightfully so, was a victim like her brother, and it had his life taken away from him. So it was a great, wonderful, it was a great ending. I get weepy and sappy at all that, so I'll move on. We've put some resources. These are great. We can make our PowerPoint available to anybody who wants it. I would really highly encourage, if this is interesting to you, to get on the National Registry of Exonerations. So part depressing to read all of the cases, but part wonderful. One thing Jess and I have learned is, particularly with Leon and many of the others, like if I came out, I would be really angry and I just want to burn stuff down, and I don't know, I would be really mad. He is the most peaceful, kind, loving person, and many of when we went to that conference, we got to meet a lot of exonerees, and a lot of them are like that. I think it must be that they have to do that, because living in anger is not going to get you anywhere and not productive, and so I would highly encourage anyone to get on the registry and read the stories. Leon's case is on there, so it's very exciting. And there's our contact information. We would love to open it up to anybody who has questions. I mean, we left time so that you would do that, because most of the time when we go out and talk, people have questions for us. I knew it would be you.
I know. It's like, oh my God, this is just incredible. The whole ideal is just incredible. But JW, he's still free.
He is still free. We turned over our file to IMPD and gave them everything that we have in their defense. It's 25 years later, and someone has already been in prison. It would be a particularly hard case. He is one of the people that was interviewed. I did not interview him because we didn't think it would be appropriate, because we'd probably have to get him counsel and read him Miranda warnings. So the defense attorneys talked to him. I wish he had confessed. I wasn't holding out any hope that he would, but he is still free. We know where he is, and IMPD always has the opportunity to bring the case back to us if they think that if we could prosecute it.
Thank you for your service and what you're doing. This whole ideal is just incredible that you're going and getting involved in the statistics are just icky, but what you're doing is just beautiful. So keep up the good work.
Thank you.
How do you keep your own mental health in check? I'm feeling so overwhelmed about people who are in jail who should.
Our mental health.
She's asking how we keep our mental health intact. Some days are easier than others. I'm a crier, so I just get it out. I have 2 wonderful children who keep me busy and motivated, so I think everybody, Jess is a big hiker and bicycle rider, and I think that's one of her releases. It's hard, but at the same time, I think I've told, when I recently did a talk with Leon, it is intoxicating to change someone's life that way, and to do something so positive. So Jess and I are always ready to give me another one. Like, let's go and let's work on another case.
Does Leon get any kind of compensation or anything for being wrongly accused?
So the question is, does Leon get any compensation? So in 2020, I believe Indiana passed the exoneration fund. And so if you can prove that you're actually innocent, which is you go in front of a board, it can be kind of like a trial again, then you are entitled to $50,000 per year that you were incarcerated. Which sounds big, but Leon Benson was in prison for 25 years. He doesn't have Social Security, he doesn't have a job history, he doesn't have retirement, he doesn't have insurance. So, and they get that payment over 5 years. That's option one. The other option is that they can sue civilly under what's called a 1983 lawsuit, essentially claiming a civil rights violation. And he would probably get more money if he chose to go that route.
If you're reopening one of these cases and you exonerate someone, like hypothetically, let's say that the JW was also tried at the same time and found innocent, and then new evidence was presented later on, would double jeopardy come into play? Could you come back at him with this new evidence, or if he was already found innocent once?
If he was found, the question is, if he was found not guilty and evidence came out that he was guilty, he could never be tried again. I have a case that I'm looking at right now where one defendant was found not guilty, the other was found guilty, and not guilty guy is now saying, well, he had nothing to do with it either. But I believe rightfully skeptical, because that guy was found not guilty, so he can say whatever he wants. It's never going to come back on him. But once you are found not guilty, that's it.
Two questions, one of them really quick. JW, in all these years, has he ever been in jail or anything? I mean, he's a drug dealer. Has he had any convictions for any crimes in that time period?
We purposely put just initials in there to not disclose information that we didn't believe should be public. He has not been a little angel.
He's not been.
Not been a little angel.
Okay. And the other one was, obviously you were defense attorneys and you saw cases go how you didn't feel they should have gone. And I know you don't look at your own cases, but have you had cases where you felt there was injustice, and have you had those looked at, and have any of those progressed, or?
Yeah, I'm looking at maybe two of Kelly's right now. I will say that in my experience, in the late 2000s and from now, with the new safeguards that have come into place, I think we're doing a pretty good job. I've had prosecutors come to me when I was a defense attorney and be like, I think your guy has an alibi. Like, you should I'm gonna agree to release him. And he did have an alibi. I truly believe that people really want to do the right thing. So yes, I've disagreed a lot with verdicts, and I can think of a couple people who I don't think did it. Hopefully we'll get to them all.
So, presentation actually creates several questions for me, and I'll try and limit it. But so, from like a victim perspective, when they find out that you're coming back and looking at a case, and that their whole world may be upset again, how does a victim feel in response to something like this type of investigation?
Not good. I mean, it's just been awful. When on Leon's case, when I went out and talked to Casey's sister Colleen, I was crying before she did, because I didn't want to. I knew I was going to break her heart and make her sad, and I don't like to make anybody sad, and so it's understandably hard, and it took her a long time to even after we vacated the conviction, she was very angry with me. And it just took her, I was like, just read everything, read it over and over, and you can still be mad at me, and you can still call me, and you can still yell at me if you want to, that's fine. I think sometimes victims will never believe, that they didn't get it right, and I understand that. But it is hard for them, and we try to point them to resources. That's one of the things we do. Send them to Healing Justice, that's an organization that is set up entirely for wrongful convictions. It was set up by a woman who was a rape victim, Jennifer Thompson, who's wonderful. She has a great book called Picking Cotton. If you're ever interested, it's one of the best books I've ever written. And it's this. I wrote it. It's great that I've ever read. And she talks about her journey of. Ronald Cotton was convicted of raping her, and eventually DNA proved that it wasn't him, and now they're good friends. And so that's her journey. Everybody gets to different points at different times. I think all victims and their families are going to be different, but it is truly one of the hardest things that we do. One of the things we even asked Healing Justice was, when do we notify the victim's family? Do we notify them when we get the application? And the prevailing wisdom was notify them when you're going to leave your office. If you're going to step outside of your office, you're done reading all the papers, and someone could hear that you were out in the community talking, that's when you need to notify the victim's family and let them know, so they don't hear it some other way. They hear it directly from you. And so Jess and I have made some really hard phone calls, and people have cried and yelled, and it's fine. That they get to process it however they want to process it, but it's really hard for them, and we understand that.
So second, I guess kind of important question to me is completely, appreciate, this effort and support. I understand that the states can have them and stuff, but how is the CI unit funded? Is it just part of the prosecutor's budget? Is there like a grant or something that?
Prosecutor Mears felt it was strong. He felt so strong in his convictions that he does it through his regular budget. The grants that there are for CAUs are really hard to get. They're few and far between, but he felt it was important enough that he did it through his regular budget.
What happens once you present all your information to the prosecutor and then to the judge? The judge is the final. So if the judge reads through everything and does not agree, what happens? Nothing? Okay.
Young lady in red, you've been waiting patiently.
This always brings mixed emotions to me, but I applaud the prosecutor's office for looking at this, because for a number of years there's been so many cases that have been wrongfully, and people that have been wrongfully convicted. Even going back to Emmett Till when he was, said he raped a white woman, and prevalent in the black community. But I guess one of the concerns I have, preventive measures are better than going after they've gone to jail. And the other part of that is because the cases are so high in the black community, and you know that there is a major, major problem when you look at the numbers, that the racial boundaries and what's happening is because either poor blacks cannot get out of jail because they don't have the money compared to their other counterparts, and that Brian Stevenson, which I'm sure you guys all know, has written many, many stories about how he's helped cases like this come to fruition. And I just applaud the prosecutor's office for even getting us to this point, because something has to change when you see so many of the young kids going and saying their plea bargain, and they don't even know what it means. So the convictions are higher, but the people get wrongfully accused. So.
And I think it's really important. One of the things that Jess and I feel really strongly about is making good partners. And when the Leon Benson case came out and the pleadings were read by IMPD, who were probably skeptical about the work that we were doing, we couldn't have been prouder that one of the high in command at IMPD sent an email immediately to all the detectives and said, they're right. We have to turn all of that over. So I think that those kind of things are good, and we're hoping we can eventually convince a lot of them that it's not, Kelly and Jess aren't just opening the floodgates, and that if we've taken a case all the way to the courts, that it means something, if there was something there, but we've got to build bridges. And although I'm sure it's hard for many people to accept that, you know, the police could have made mistakes on a case, I'm very relieved to hear that the people in command are saying the same things that we are. And I think we meet with them pretty regularly with the head of the homicide detectives, because that's the majority of the cases that we work on, and we're hoping to keep those relationships going, and we're hoping to be part of training. That's one of the things that we would love to be a part of, is training on best practices. Hear it from our perspective of what defense attorneys would say. I think that's important. Police officers do wonderful work and work jobs that are not necessarily respected or appreciated oftentimes. And so I think we need to be good partners with them so that we can all do a better job. I don't know if you have something.
No, go ahead.
She mentioned it, the idea of plea bargaining, and there are movies about it and there are stories about it where a black person's been accused of something, has no money for defense, chooses 5 years instead of 25 years. Does that land on your desk? Because, and the person is innocent, but
Yes.
I'd rather
that
take the
could-
5 instead of 25.
So Prosecutor Mears has allowed us to look at cases where a guilty plea is how it was resolved, and that's because we know sometimes people plead guilty when they're faced with really bad options. I mean, I've advised clients before, like, look, you're facing 65 years, I have 15. Like, you know, it's a really bad decision to have to make, but people do make it. And I'm sure that there are innocent people in prison who have pled guilty. So yes, that is something that we would look at, and we would treat it exactly the same as we treat the ones that went to trial.
We can take one more question, but we'll stick around if you want to talk to us.
Yeah.
You mentioned that people from different races have a harder time identifying someone from another race. Do you think part of that is bias, or?
So the question is, with cross-racial identification and people of different races having difficulties identifying people of other races, do I think that that's bias? I think it could be. I think that that's obviously very, I'm generalizing huge. I think there could be bias, but I also think that people bring their lived experiences. And, you know, I grew up in a town that was all white people. There was one black child in my school. And the way that slavery was taught to me was, that was really bad, but we fixed it and everything's fine now. And then I went to college, I was at Detroit, and I was like, hold up, what's going on here? So I think some of it is what you've been exposed to. You know, I've deposed Hispanic witnesses, and they're trying to describe the black suspect's hair, and they're interlacing dreadlocks and cornrows, and you know, so it's hard to get accurate descriptions if you're not familiar, or it could be bias. I'm not a scholar on that, but
There's lots of studies on it if you want to read. Thank you very much.
thank you.